You don't look at it like, is it a black and white thing?
It's designed for you, not for me.
But sometimes you wonder why.
The banks aren't trying hard enough to reach this marketplace.
Many of the largest lenders deny black applicants 2 to 3 times more than white applicants. How does that make you feel?
It's heartbreaking.
We should be past that.
It goes back to the old times where you have to work twice as hard just to get halfway to your white counterparts.
We deserve a good quality of life, just like anyone else.
What does that tell you?
What that tells me is nothing has changed.
Consider this. Black men and women make up almost 25% of the Charlotte area's population, yet in 2018 and 2019 accounted for just 13% of mortgages and home equity loans. Without a doubt, it is far more difficult to secure a home loan if you are black. Our analysis of federal data found most of Charlotte's largest lenders deny black applicants 2 to 3 times more often than their white counterparts. And we found disparities in every income bracket. Why? We started searching for that answer months ago, and along the way, found possible solutions. When you look at this is where we still are. For a man who marched in the 60s, how does that make you feel?
It's very difficult for a person like myself to understand and still tolerate where we are today.
It certainly indicates that there are disparities, and we know that. But this is a marketplace that can be reached.
It never ceases to amaze me that even in 2021, we're dealing with this. The race still continues to be the biggest disease in this country.
I feel relaxed once I get there. I just feel like I'm not there yet.
Barring any last-minute surprises,
Yes.
Shay Myers will become a homeowner within the next month.
I can't wait till I move in. It's going to be a big accomplishment because I'm the first kid out of my mom's that she raised to be a homeowner and have a good credit score, and I'm the youngest.
But her journey began
It took a lot to get here. It took a lot.
3 years ago with a denial.
My debt to income, it was just too high, and my credit score is too low.
The most recent Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data show most black applicants are denied home loans for the same reasons: credit and debt to income ratio. Advocates say those denials are the result of socioeconomic disadvantages.
I have 2 children, 1 Camden and 7 Hayden. I rent with my mom and my grandmom and my 2 kids. I've been taking care of my mom since I was 18. She's in a wheelchair. And my grandma just recently came down from New Jersey, so I've been taking care of her. She's deaf. I'm the main breadwinner of the household. I've been with 2 jobs for quite some time. I still do like Amazon on the side, on top of my 2 jobs. I don't have that much sleep. I probably have maybe 3 hours. I know it's not healthy, but it's what I have to do to keep my family afloat.
People who grew up in 2 families household who were white, their parents were able to help them buy their first home or pay for them to go to college. A young African American today growing up in a family, the family is not able to give them money to help buy a house or help pay for their education. So they end up with student debt. Bingo, okay? They have to buy a car to get back and forth to work.
If you want to talk about something that's as un-American as you can imagine, it's that, where your credit profile is worse because of the community you live in and how you've been treated by the majority institutions in our country. That is what is not fair.
While you're in college, what also happens, you get inundated with credit cards. And here is a young person who does not understand how the financial services industry works, saying, oh, I got money. I can go out and buy things. You end up with a lot of debt, and nobody has taught you how to handle that.
Fair housing laws strengthened after the 2008 housing collapse are meant to take race out of lending decisions. Instead, those decisions come down to a person's ability to repay a home loan. But advocates say that equates to an equal system for people with unequal circumstances.
Think about 100 years of growth for white families and 0 for blacks. You think about 200 years of growth for white families and 0 for blacks. You think about 300 years of growth for white families, and maybe within the 300-year period, you have 12% growth for blacks. and 400 years of growth for white families, and maybe now 38% for Black people.
It's set up in a automated underwriting system, and it's designed for you, not for me. It's designed for your profile. My profile comes in and it's different.
Is that an unfair position to start from?
Absolutely.
Then you hear folks tell you to your face, the life that you have is the life that you made, because everything's equal. You have the same opportunities I have. And I'm telling them, no, I don't. And I work 20 times harder than you, and I still don't have the same opportunities that you have.
The way I describe it, they're not able to get into the Monopoly game and get to the table because they don't have assets. In order to play Monopoly, you got to have assets.
It's the never-ending battle for Black people. And it's not to say that there hasn't been some Black successes. There has been. We know that. But in comparison to our white counterparts, it's minimal.
I think the most important solution is sensitive underwriting. There are reasons why a person of color might have higher debt to income ratios because, quite honestly, economically, it is more difficult for people of color to make things work. Very often, there are situations where you're helping family members. There are situations where you are not receiving the same remuneration for the same career that a majority person would be getting. And quite frankly, there are just situations where there's leftover debt from a previous economic life in which you had difficulty for many reasons associated with the fact that you are a person of color. So all of this adds up. So you need sensitive underwriting. Perhaps the higher debt to income ratio is not a predictor of how the person is going to pay their mortgage.
I know people that went through 5, 6 different lenders.
Recognize the fact of their reality and then begin to track some non-traditional credit lines.
Just as intentional as our forefathers were in ensuring a system was put in place to keep us oppressed, we must be intentional about building equity for Black people who have been oppressed.
Some folks need to be denied because their behavior has not been solid. That's different than somebody that, they had a relative that died, and for 2 or 3 months, they were late on some things because they helped cover the funeral for this indigent relative who had no money to be buried.
That has to come from the federal level. And force the system to adjust and change.
What needs to change?
What needs to change first is the way people see each other. That goes to having implicit bias training. That helps you begin in whatever position you hold of power to begin to treat people differently. The way that they view people of color affects how they treat people of color. The second thing needs to change is the entire system. It needs to be revamped.
We've got to make this inequity, this racial inequity in housing a priority.
With the new administration in the White House, the agency that oversees the mortgage industry now calls racial equity a top priority.
We need to press this even more.
I'm always hopeful. I think a lot of it has to do with who we make a decision on in leadership. Makes a big difference. Whether it's city, county, or state, it makes a difference. Who is the person sitting in a room making decisions for you? And are they really making decisions for you, or are they making decisions in their best interests?
The House Financial Services Committee is planning a fair housing hearing in the coming weeks.
Just how pervasive is lending discrimination in the U.S.? Is it wide scale, or is it just a small problem?
It's very wide scale, especially when you consider Congresswoman Adams, that almost all of the technologies that we use in the lending space, automated underwriting systems, risk-based pricing systems, and credit scoring systems discriminate against consumers of color and other underserved groups. So the discrimination is very prevalent, which is why we have to really work to de-bias all of these technologies that we're using in the housing and financial services space.
We really need to address this issue. This is a critical issue if we're talking about trying to get people up out of the trenches, to move people get them up in terms of the mobility, knowing that owning a home is really one of the best ways to gain some, economic prosperity.
The regulators just need to be a little harder on the institutions that aren't trying hard. And they need to continue to reward those institutions that are really trying.
We really need to work on this. We put together, after this Great Recession, one of the largest reform bills, Dodd-Frank, and there's been a lot of pushback on that, but we had to have it.
We want collaboration that leads to change.
Your family ever experienced this kind of challenge?
I'll just have to say, yeah, absolutely. And just recently too, but I won't go into all that because I don't want to put the names of my family out there. But yeah, I've owned 3 properties myself. I have not personally had that kind of situation, but I know that there've been some other folks in my family who have, and it's very unfortunate. And not because they don't make they don't have good jobs, don't have good credit, and all those kinds of things. Outstanding credit better than mine in some instances. But yeah, I know folks who even not just family but friends.
You look at what has happened in 2020 with Black Lives Matter, and for me, I grew up in the 60s. I marched in the 60s, okay? And it was just us. Today, in that movement, you see people of all ages and all races. And that gives me hope.
I am absolutely optimistic about it, and hope that we don't have to have this same kind of conversation another 4 years from now.
Industry banking groups tell us they continue to advocate for policy changes that can help reduce lending disparity rates. You won't hear from those groups or the 13 largest lenders on camera because all declined an on-camera interview. The American Bankers Association told us banks are committed to working with policymakers to reduce the structural barriers standing in the way of hardworking and deserving Americans who may not all qualify under current rules. Rules that are rigorous, particularly for banks, and include internal and federal oversight.
There are a lot of good people out there who believe in doing the right thing.
They are trying, and they are concerned about this.
Advocates recognize the steps lenders are taking within the current constraints to try and help. The North Carolina Bankers Association shared a 5-page list of just some of the initiatives area banks are taking part in, investing millions in special loan programs, down payment assistance grants, grants to reduce interest rates, homebuyer education, and more. While advocates welcome those efforts, at the same time, they say those lenders,
they don't have a face in that community,
need to increase their presence in Black communities to rebuild trust.
Most people of color are afraid of banks because if they have had an experience with a bank, it's been negative.
And offer even more products.
Someone in Charlotte with a household income of $300,000 needs a different kind of mortgage product than someone in Charlotte where the household income is $40,000. But they both can be homeowners.
I have to step back and say, okay, Floyd, what can you do about it?
They also say borrowers have a role too.
We are educating every home buyer we can get our hands on.
That's the key here. We're not leaving out the borrowers. The borrowers need to do better.
When a person can't afford a loan based on how they fill out their application, they may need someone to guide them through an application because there may be an opportunity on additional funding that they could get.
That's where we come in as housing counseling agencies that can sit and work with them and help them clean up their credit report and also get them into a position, get their credit score up and in a position where they can qualify for a conventional mortgage.
The borrowers need to become more savvy about good credit practice.
We are focusing on financial literacy and financial empowerment with those individuals.
The borrowers need to have emergency savings.
I thought you're supposed to work as many jobs. You're supposed to do all these things.
Shay Myers is a good example.
Took long nights and, no sleep.
She worked harder.
I went to probably like 5-6 home buying classes just to get it right.
Cleaned up her credit.
I finally became credible as credit-wise last March.
And saved enough money for a down payment.
I can't wait till I get my keys so I can do the ugly cry.
Now, all that stands in the way of her getting the keys to her own home is final loan approval.
I love it. I love the colors. I love the stonework. I'm happy I got a porch. It's just even the little things that make you happy, like seeing the whole process. Like, you notice every little thing. You're like, oh my, I have a mailbox today. And, oh, I got the numbers on my house. And oh, they put up the stone. So you just notice every little thing about your house. I'm just happy that, we all can live comfortably. You just can't wait for all the memories that you make.
Now, this is just a snapshot of mortgage lending. We don't have access to the details of every loan denial like regulators and lenders do. The American Bankers Association told us any meaningful review of fair lending practices must include those details, like a borrower's credit score, credit history, loan to value, and debt to income ratios. All that said, a recent Urban Institute study reported the black-white homeownership gap reached its highest level in 50 years in 2018. Nate Morabito, WCNC Charlotte.